Well, hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Tariffs are shifting. Are you ready? This is part one of a two-part webinar that we are going to be holding to have a conversation about all of the all of the different stuff that's going on today with tariffs. My name is Tom Gould. I'm with Tom. I'm with a new company, Gaia Dynamics. Um, for those of you that don't know me, I've spent many years as a customs and trade consultant, helping importers as well as customs brokers and other companies that trade internationally on all aspects of customs valuation, customs classification, customs country of origin, free trade agreements, and all other aspects of customs compliance. Today, now I am the Chief Strategy and Compliance Officer at a new company, Gaia Dynamics. Gaia Dynamics is a company that's using modern artificial intelligence technology to build tools to help companies stay on top of all of the regulatory issues. A primary function of our technology is to help companies to determine HTS classifications, along with the duty rates and all the various different tariffs that are associated with the classifications, all the different government agency regulations, and everything else tied to the HTS classification. Let's see. I think I now turn things over to Dave, who's going to moderate our presentation today.
Thank you, Tom, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm Dave Korn, Executive Vice President of Comstock and Holt. I'm a licensed customs broker, and I serve as the trade co-lead for AAI's Drawback and Duty Deferral Committee. I also serve as the trade co-lead for the Commercial Customs Operation Advisory Committee, or COAC, and for the Trade Support Network's Drawback Working Group, leading efforts to build and transform the duty drawback program with changes to policy, business rules, regulations, and statute where possible, and serve on the COAC with Tom Gould. As you know, we have some shifting in tariffs over the last couple of weeks. I think in the trade community, we've seen more in the shifting of tariffs than we've seen in quite some time. So, the phrase that keeps coming to my head is "buckle up, Buttercup." Are we ready? We might feel like it right now, but may not feel as prepared as we are as the webinar is going on. So I'm glad that you've taken the time to join us here. And as we bring a couple of other folks together from the trade community to talk through this and where we're at, and how to best prepare our leadership for conversations, as everybody's asking, what is it that I need to know and how do I get there? Also along with us today is Christopher Smith, who is a trade advisor in the Customs Coordination Center of North America for IKEA Purchasing Services, where he is responsible for establishing and maintaining corporate compliance with all U.S. customs and other agency regulations, assisting in communicating compliance requirements globally in the IKEA organization, developing and managing customs-related projects for North America, as well as with Ned Steiner, who's the Senior Director of International Trade and Governmental Relations at Sandler, Travis, and Rosenberg. Ned has over 2 decades of experience in the fields of public policy and international trade and development, and speaks and writes on a range of trade and customs-related issues, including Section 301 and 232 tariffs, tariff exclusions, and much more. If you need more information on why these guys are famous and about our sponsor, Gaia Dynamics, please click on the resources button at the bottom of your screen and use the Q&A button to submit questions at any point during the program. We hope that this is going to be a dynamic conversation, but may get to your questions more at the end as we're going through some of the big topics that we're going to discuss and go through today. And we will discuss as many as we can as time allows at the end. So we're going to start by asking our folks who are here with us where we are now with tariffs. Where should we be looking? I'm sure everybody's paying more attention to social media than maybe you have in a long time, as much as you want to admit or not. I'm sure that everybody is, but I think everybody either is having kind of a feeling of some whiplash, or we feel like we're kind of drinking from a fire hose. So Chris, I'm going to start with you from an
Okay.
importer's perspective. Kind of what's the initial reaction here? How does everybody feel? And where do we go? We had some initial tariffs that come out, with Canada and Mexico. They're kind of withdrawn for a little bit, and then there's tariffs on China, steel and aluminum, and then the reciprocal tariffs are coming out right now as we speak. So, Chris, I'll turn it to you.
Yeah, we're It's kind of overwhelming, especially in a 4 week time period.
Oh,
Um, I've been joking, we've gotten more questions, and the administration is 4 for 4 for killing a Monday morning on me. With new emails with questions on what came out either Friday or over the weekend or even on that day's announcements. But yeah, I mean, right now we've been dealing with a lot of questions around Canada, Mexico. Do we think they're going to be re-implemented or not? We're getting questions on the steel and aluminum and what are the impacts. And we've also had to try to educate on what are realistic expectations because, for the steel and aluminum, we were literally getting questions an hour after he signed the executive orders, and we couldn't even get a copy of the executive order yet, let alone, we're still waiting on the Federal Register notice so that we can get the annex so that we can do actual analysis compared to the 232 tariffs that were already in place. So, and I literally was joking with everyone before we started. I literally had CNN on waiting for the announcement on the reciprocal tariffs right up until I had to switch on to here. So yeah, it's been a big scramble from an importer perspective. It's how fast can we get the information, and then how fast can we give a high level analysis out to management and to purchasing.
yeah, thanks. And I think similar from the broker's perspective, Tom. I mean, some similar questions to what Chris has, but kind of different ways of how things have to go and what order.
Yeah, I say today when I'm talking to companies, talking to importers, there's a lot of things that companies really need to be thinking about today because of the changes that are coming. Companies really need to be nimble and able to make changes, make changes quickly, make changes on the fly. Um, Data is becoming much more critical, not only having access to the data, but having access to the tools that are that companies can use to analyze the data. One of the things I've said to several people today, I think the most valuable skill set that somebody can have that is especially somebody that's looking to get involved in global trade and customs, is data analytics. Having the ability to take a look at your data and understand the impacts of all of the tariffs on all the tariffs on what's happening. There are options, none of the options are really good options, but there definitely are options and things that companies need to think about. Reshoring is one of the things that we hear a lot about today in discussions. And when I talk to companies, a lot of companies say, but it's just impossible for me to manufacture products in the US. Well, today is the time where companies need to think, is there one product that you can start with that you can start to figure out how you can move some of your production either into the US or maybe closer to the US to a friendly country? And then diversification is another key, right? It's no longer a viable business model to import all of your products from China. That's just no longer a viable option. Companies need to have relationships all around the world so that they can take advantage of whatever the new tariffs are that are going to be coming into play.
Ned, any additional thoughts there?
Yeah, just in terms of being nimble, I think also there's a degree of patience that's required. We're seeing a lot of action, a lot of heat, but not necessarily forward motion. A lot of these ideas are ideas that the president and his team have been thinking about for a long time, and they were eager to get them out and share them with the world. Um, and but they're works in progress, and as we've seen, um, it's one thing to have an idea about what you want to do about addressing. It's one thing to have to identify a problem, and then have the energy to address that problem, and then put in place the details and the operations to do that. So I think patience is important, but back to Tom's point about nimbleness is, we have to, in some cases, we have to wait. And I would just also say that there's no silver bullet. There's not going to be something that solves this problem. So we have to, address each issue as it comes up, and we have to be ready to respond accordingly.
Yeah, very good. And I think, with the different tariffs now, with some different things that we've seen that have come out, right? We've seen with Canada and Mexico and the additional 10% on China, right? That IEPA has been utilized. And now with steel and aluminum, with the expansion on Section 232, just as we're still kind of in this realm, like what are some of the other mechanisms that we think the administration may use when it comes to the tariffs that could be coming? I think what we've seen is that anybody that has a trade deficit with the United States is probably going to be looked at here, especially with the reciprocal tariffs, right? And what that's going to look like for each country. But how and in what mechanism do we see these being rolled out? Ned, so maybe I'll go back to you with that.
Yeah, thanks. Well, yeah, we were looking forward to seeing details. Looking forward to seeing details about reciprocal tariffs, and what it appears to be a little bit building on the earlier executive orders and building on the earlier actions, using 301, using 232, using IEPA. They have not yet mentioned 338, which is the section that allows for up to 50% duties or even bans on imports or third-party actions. There are other tools out there, Section 122. We have not yet seen them mobilize those. And I think it's because they're frankly not sure the direction that they want to take, what makes the most sense. Speaking of nimbleness, the president wants to be nimble, right? The president wants to be able to sort of threaten the imposition of these tariffs and to get results from those threats. But it's not clear exactly whether the tariffs are just going to be used for that negotiating purpose, or they're going to be used for intrinsic value. And I think on the reciprocal tariffs, we're seeing that the president, I think, imagines imposing these tariffs to level the playing field. And then unless the other country in this game lowers their tariffs, the U.S. will maintain those tariffs. So those would be instances where that's not going to come on and come off the way, Mexico, Canada might, as we sort of move towards a review or even a renegotiation of USMCA, which I think is where we're going with Canada and Mexico. So in some, maybe not new tools so much as using 301, using 232, and now IEPA as we go forward. I'm not saying they're not going to use the new tools, but we haven't yet seen an indication of them trying that out yet.
Yeah, I think maybe kind of a wait and see approach. Chris or Tom, anything else to add there?
Well, I'd say that when Ned was talking about Section 338 of the Tariff Act of 1930, I agree. If you look at that provision, it talks about discrimination. And I think that's one of the reasons that the administration is looking to potentially use that provision, because, what we're hearing in the news is that the current thought from the administration is that countries that charge higher duty rates on our U.S. products being imported into their country than we charge on the same or similar products being imported into the U.S., that's a form of discrimination. And that's why I think that there's been discussion about this Section 338 is because it is a law that specifically addresses discrimination. So I think that's something that we need to be watching out for.
And I would just add that you need to keep your eye out because we already have a 301 investigation into Nicaragua on forced labor. You've got statements made about possible 232 investigations into medicine and critical minerals. So the use of these trade remedies is only going to be continued or expanded even more under the current administration. And honestly, I would expect to see 301, the China 301 tariffs get revisited at some point during the administration with either an increase in the duty rates associated with that or an expansion of articles.
Yeah, all good points there. And just also to say, I think that some of these Section 232 and Section 301, that have already been implemented and some have been challenged in court, right? And those court challenges have held the president's authority in these ways. He understands maybe how the mechanism is going to work. And maybe Section 338 is something that's still to come, but still kind of trying to weigh where the powers are and how that works as well.
Yeah. And just a note too on what Chris was saying, we also have the 301 on Vietnam on currency manipulation, and we have the digital services tax. These are investigations that have been done already and that were kind of put on ice because the administration was able to get some kind of agreement, either Trump himself or subsequently Biden. But these are things that can be where the switches can be flipped on again. And I think that's also points to the use of 301 and 232 and now IEPA is they've tried these mechanisms out. And so it's kind of an easier approach to use something that you've tried before, whereas 338, as Tom was alluding to, would be a new approach. And something maybe they would have to kind of work the kinks out of before they went ahead and did that. So maybe they feel more confident in the vehicles of 232 and 301, for example.
Right, right. So transitioning from that a little bit, and we'll see if the attendees here can keep track of how many times we're going to say de minimis over the next 10 minutes. But I think obviously a hot button issue for everybody, and everybody kind of seeing the impact on what that meant for China, or at least it did at the beginning, where the shipments are restricted to some kind of formal entry or informal entry, and now the kind of a backtrack on that, at least for the time being. So, with that, do we feel that that's something that's going to come back? Is there more of a review that's coming on? Tom, maybe I'll start with you, and then Chris and Ned.
Sure. When I think about de minimis today, I have a lot of people asking me, is it going to stick around? Is it going to go away? It kind of makes me think of a quote from Shakespeare from The Tempest, misery acquaints a man with strange bedfellows. When you look at the various different parties that are in favor of or against the de minimis provision overall, you have the consumer who loves de minimis because they are able to buy products for less money. You have the express couriers and the airlines that are making money because they're the ones that are facilitating the de minimis shipments. You have on the other side, you have Congress that really doesn't like de minimis. You have the administration, specifically CBP, that doesn't like it because it's thrown so much volume at them. It's made it very difficult for them to really fulfill their mission and prevent the smuggling of, things like fentanyl and products made with forced labor and intellectual property rights violations. You also have older, more established countries that have not taken advantage of the de minimis provision that very much oppose it. And so I think that what we're at a period of time where the government, the administration, or Congress is going to really have to consider all of the various different players that are involved with de minimis and make a decision. Is this something that we want to move forward with as a country or not? And if we do we want to limit it somehow? And if so, how do we want to do that? There's also a technological aspect to it, where customs has been playing around with certain prototype programs, and as what they're seeing is that they just don't have enough information, enough data to really do their job. So if it is going to go forward, if de minimis is going to go forward, Customs has been very clear on the fact that they're going to need additional tools to help them to ensure that the companies that are doing it right have their shipments released quickly and efficiently, but also to help Customs to stop the shipments that are looking to use the de minimis provision to do nefarious acts like smuggling and so forth.
Yeah, I would agree with everything you just said, and I think it would be. I'm actually anxious to see if the administration reaches out to customs for their thoughts around it, given that, the extra administrative challenges that it has caused for customs. But for it to actually be removed, I mean, you would have to have Congress really pass a bill to do that. Even though the executive orders did originally for Canada, Mexico, and China originally take it off the table. But
So Chris,
for
Chris,
me, go ahead.
I was just saying regarding that, I've had discussions with a number of companies about that. You're right that technically this is a law that Congress would need to pass, but the administration has been really doing a lot to potentially stop or limit the de minimis. The issue is that while there's a question of whether the administration has the right to do so, they clearly can do certain things, and then there would have to be a challenge in court. And so what that would mean is that there would be a period of time where the administration can say stop to de minimis or limit to de minimis, and what's that going to do to supply chains? What's that going to do to companies that have invested heavily in the de minimis space if they can no longer use it, even though maybe ultimately down the road the courts might come back and say no, that the administration didn't have the authority to do so. But that could be 6 months, a year, a couple of years from now, and what will happen in that entire time period. So it's a real complex issue.
Right, and you do currently have, CBP does have two notice of proposed rulemaking out on low value shipments, which people should review and make comment on if you're involved with the program. I know I've looked over it, even though I've been in a lucky position. IKEA, anything we do e-commerce is done domestically, so I haven't been involved with any of the big drama around de minimis. But I mean, from a compliance and industry perspective, I mean, I have to keep up with it.
Yeah, and I would just say, I don't think this is Shakespeare, but I would say make hay while the sun shines, because especially if you're using de minimis for China origin goods, I think this consensus that is formed around de minimis in terms of controlling it or shutting it down is really China related. And there are arguments about fentanyl and forced labor. They all come back to China, really, at the end of the day. And so I think that by hook or by crook, the government is going to try to shut down that lane for China. And that might sort of alleviate some of the pressure in terms of the 4 million packages per day and so forth. And then you'll have an interesting conversation, I think, to allude to what Tom was saying, because you'll have these different interests. Once China is off the board, then you'll have the consumers versus brick and mortar versus e-commerce versus whoever. And I think it would be interesting to see how de minimis without China in the equation plays out. And then, also there's questions about data information that come up in the NPRM that Chris made reference to. But I think that I am advising that anybody using China, anybody using 321 de minimis for China goods right now needs to start looking at Plan B if they're not already.
Yeah, I think yeah, great comments there all around. And I think kind of pivoting a little bit here, gentlemen, as we have the reciprocal the fair and reciprocal plan, as it has been titled, that has just come out as this webinar has started. And so some investigation or asking agencies to investigate what these new tariffs could look like. And the thought is that that investigation will be closed by April 1, and then a determination on what that's going to look like as far as new tariffs. So we had talked about China with the 321 shipments, and Ned mentioning kind of Plan B, and now some other countries that are being brought to the forefront here, and India specifically being called out, but certainly others, and kind of just off the fly here, guys, what does that look like with a reciprocal tariff plan, as you have different rates for shipments to other countries? And Tom, I'm going to tee you up here first, kind of what, how that impacts, what the brokerage community is trying to do, and how that's something that customs is also going to have to adjust to on the fly when it comes to these reciprocal tariffs, and potentially, with the VAT also.
So first of all, you mentioned something that was new that I don't know that we've all heard about. Can you say again what was the new thing and where did it come out?
The fair and reciprocal plan
Okay. Is
that
that something brand new? I,
just came out as we were on the
Those
webinar.
are those are the details that we've received about reciprocal tariffs. And
okay.
frankly, I don't know, Dave, it sounds like you had a chance to look at it also. It doesn't look all that different from the executive order that came out, that was on the whitehouse.gov. And maybe it puts a finer point on it and gives some examples of the egregiousness of the unfair trade that exists. Um, but it, asks for these reviews, these studies, which is exactly what the whitehouse.gov document did.
Right.
um, it's not clear that there's all that much that's different about it, um, other than the president is reminding us that this is still a problem that he's focused on, and he's urging his agencies to do something about it. Um, but yeah, I think that again, I said this earlier, and then I'm interested to hear what Chris and Tom have to say about it, but there's intention and then there's rubber meeting the road, right? So clearly the president is concerned about the unfair trade, right? And the US getting a raw deal. I don't need to say that. Everybody knows that. The real question is, how does that become operational? Um, and they're they're working on that. They have this idea, and now putting the idea into practice is challenging, and it is indeed. And so, but frankly, I don't think they know yet how to do it. They've signaled what tools they might use. They've signaled what countries they might be targeting. But we don't know yet how that's going to get done.
So when I joined Gaia Dynamics, one of the first things that I said was that I wanted to do is I wanted to be able to provide a tool that will allow companies to really stay on top of all of the changing aspects of tariffs. What we're seeing today, and part of the reason we're having this webinar, is that there've been a bunch of new tariffs that have been announced. There's some that have been implemented. There's some that haven't been implemented yet. There's some that were implemented and pulled back, and there's all kinds of stuff going back and forth. And one of the things that companies need to know and need to do is to be on top of this is when there's a new rumor of a tariff, how is that going to impact my company's products? If that new tariff is on a specific country, if it's on a specific commodity group, if it's on a certain type of product, how is a company going to really get a handle on what's current today, what's been formally announced and is going to be in effect at some point in time in the near future, and then what are all those rumors that are out there that are circulating around? Because it's one thing to understand the tariffs, and if you're as a broker, you go into your system and the tariffs are there, but it doesn't stay up to date with the rumor that just came up out of a tweet yesterday or today, and how does that impact my products? I'm going to give an example, and the example is that when we saw the announcements about tariffs on aluminum and steel products, the announcements talked about derivative aluminum products, derivative steel products. And what those are products that are made from aluminum or made from steel. And so one of the questions is, what really is a derivative product? How much aluminum or steel does it need to have in it? And then will the tariff apply to the total value of the product or just to the value of the metal within the product? These are the types of nuanced issues that companies that import need to be on top of, need to have a place where they can go and find the information, whether it's final or simply just a rumor or anywhere in between. And that's something that companies today are struggling with. And I think that we all need to work together, and especially, looking at leveraging an association like AAEI on how to help its members keep abreast of all the things that are changing.
Yeah, in following up, I mean, the devil is definitely in the details. I mean, so literally we're waiting on the Federal Register notice for steel and aluminum to get the annex to see, all right, based on what was already in place for derivatives, are they adding anything right now? Are we waiting for the comment period by industry to add? What gets added? How fast? And then for the reciprocal, are we talking about industry like a specific commodity? Are we going across the board? Are we doing a weighted average? How is he implementing that? Because that can have a huge difference. I mean, you're talking about 194 other countries in the world, and the US tariff schedule has over 17,000 HTS numbers. How fast could ITC update the tariff with potentially 194 different duty rates for each of those 17,000 tariffs?
Chris, I think that's an excellent point. And actually, I'm looking at a question that's in the chat that was raised here that I think is a perfect time for that. And the question that was asked is, can CBP's technical duty calculation system keep up with the verbal presidential announcements? And I think that that's an important question. First of all, they don't have to necessarily keep up with the announcements, but they have to keep up with what the ITC and the other government agencies do with those announcements. But it's important to understand that there are limitations in the ACE system. So if you're a importer today and you're importing, let's say, products that are from China that are subject to the normal duty rate, plus the Section 301 duty, plus the new 10% duty, Customs ACE system doesn't do a good job of calculating those duties. And Customs is actually relying on the importer and through them their broker to do the calculations and make sure the calculations are correct. So because of some limitations in the technology and the fast pace that we're seeing all these new tariffs, it's incumbent upon every importer to double check to make sure that their brokers are filing the entries with the correct calculations. Now, I hope that all the companies that are listening, that are importers, that are paying these duties today, that they have an audit program where they go back and they look at their entries to make sure that they were filed correctly. And in the past, we've kind of relied on the broker's software and on custom system to validate that if I put in the right classification, the right country of origin, the right value, that the math will be worked out. Today, we can't rely on that as much. Customs can't do that validation as well as we think they can. So companies need to be doing that themselves.
I just wanted to add too, we talk about products and we, sort of in customs world, think about HTS numbers, but keep in mind that it's the Department of Commerce that is sort of helming all of these initiatives. And commerce is a very different way of doing business. The anti-dumping countervailing duty is not based on HTS. It's based on product. And so it may well be that we start to see different approaches, and maybe there are scope conversations, instead of classification conversations. we're in virgin territory here. But I think it's important for companies to be aware of that it's and sort of to Tom's point, customs is not necessarily going to have all the answers, nor be the locus of the answers. Those answers might come from different agencies where you don't have the longstanding relationships, and yet another reason to work on your nimbleness.
And just to kind of cap off or add, I mean, you've seen that also with the kind of rollback of the application of de minimis with China, especially around like postal and the express carriers. While they've been able to handle that especially the air carriers in a certain way, with their manifest and the type 86 entries, the shift and removal of that de minimis and the idea of having them shift to a type 11 informal entry, I mean, puts a lot of strain on there, especially with the postal, where customs and postal service have always kind of struggled on how do you handle and do a proper customs clearance on those packages. So are the agencies able to keep up with the fast pace of the administration at the moment? No. But I mean, you've seen with the steel and aluminum executive orders and that executive order backtracking on taking de minimis off of China, them giving the agencies through commerce the ability to try to work through those system and process upgrades that they need to be able to put these in place.
But we might be in a situation where it's sort of a design build scenario where, they're not necessarily going to run traps on everything and make sure that it's going to be implemented in a smooth and rational way. They might just go forward and say, this is what the reality is, and wait to see what happens. Does it work? Does it not work? I mean, we saw that with de minimis in IEPA in China. So the sort of thinking that, well, there's no way they could do reciprocal tariffs. Are you kidding me? So many countries, so many HTS numbers. They might go ahead and do it, and then you just got to figure it out. So it's I've been saying lately, it's not a question of if, it's a question of when and for how long. So I think brace yourselves is a good position to be in.
Yeah, and I think we've seen the HTS numbers for China that have come out, right? But to Chris's point earlier, you're still waiting for the annex for steel. So there's a lot of different ways in which this is going to come out and how the system's going to be ready for it or not. Consider, there's a question in the chat about if ACE can handle the changes, especially for de minimis changes to informal entry for low value. And, certainly that's a question that I think a lot of people have. How is that something that as these changes roll out, there needs to be communication so that folks are aware. And, like Tom had mentioned before, just about broker systems and being updated. But, what does that look like from the government's perspective as these changes are happening, as the reviews are finalized and when they're able to be rolled out?
So, Dave, let me touch on the question that was asked about tracking and the dates of actions. Can customs actually do that? And the answer is somewhat yes and somewhat no, right? They can put in place a new tariff number from Chapter 99 that imposes the additional duty rate that a broker can select and use when they file the entry that will add that additional duty to the entry. But that's only one part of the problem, one part of the issue, right? What I was saying earlier is that maybe they can add that number, but can they check to make sure that the broker puts the number on the entry correctly? That involves additional programming to look at the country of origin, potentially to look at other tariff numbers like Chapter 98 numbers, to look at other issues, dates, things like that. that stuff gets a lot more complicated and takes more time. So when customs has implemented additional tariffs in the past, like the Section 301 tariffs, they start by throwing the number into the system, right? The number allows the broker to add the additional duty, but it's not doing a lot of checking beyond that. If the broker didn't select it, is it going to warn them and say, hey, you forgot? Not sure. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. Depends on the system. Is the broker's system going to do that? Is ACE going to do that? Is both going to do that? All of these things are reasons why we're in a period of time where companies need to be very careful to make sure that they're doing things right because like us, the government is also, scrambling to get the new technology implemented.
And I would just say, just real quick, Ned, before you step in here, but just to say that as potentially software providers also need to be keyed into that, right? If there's value that's associated with a Chapter 99 HTS line, and that's different from how, an underlying HTS would traditionally have that. Now we're talking about something maybe different that needs to be allocated for. So just some additional things that we need to be focused on. Ned?
Yeah, I just would also put out there that we've seen um, retroactive duty refunds, et cetera. We might see retroactive duty impositions where importers will be obliged to submit PSCs and pay additional duties. If we have effectiveness dates that are after or before rather entry is made. So just to echo what Tom said about being careful and because there are a lot of these elements that are in play and the sort of standard way of doing business is really being threatened as well, I would say.
That's an excellent point, Ned, especially, I mean, as soon as you said that, I was thinking of the bill that's in the House for China permanent normal trade relation status, because that has a clause in it that would have it go back a year, going back to January 1st, 2024. And now you've got anybody that was an importer is now liable for the increased duties from a year's worth of past imports, or a year and a half, depending on when and if it got passed and signed. So yeah, I mean, it's a very insane time to be in the importing business, and it's definitely job security for us and compliance.
Yeah, I would say, just kind of echoing behind that, Chris, compliance is going to be so key here, and making sure you're buttoned up all the way. Speaking to your leadership, we've talked about that. What does the leadership's asking questions too, right? What does all of this mean? Well, it means we have to have all of our ducks in a row, and we need to be communicating with one another, just making sure that everybody understands what's coming out. And that's why double check the source, right? Double check everything that's coming so that we know what it is that the guidelines are going to be behind that, and how things are programmed and how we need to do that and to do it compliantly so that there's no issues as we go forward on behalf of our customers, and can continue to keep trade moving safely and securely here in the United States. And we've talked about this too, kind of a little bit just at a very high level, but are there duty mitigation strategies, right? We've seen some things that have come out, and a lot of folks are focused on, well, we have a duty drawback program in place. And certainly that works for Section 301 tariffs that are out there, for underlying duties, taxes, and fees that are out there. There are restrictions, of course, for Section 232. The presidential proclamation has excluded drawback from being claimed there. And then from IEEPA as well, right? So when we saw the Canada and Mexico tariff announcement, as well as the IEEPA tariffs on China, that drawback was excluded there. So are there other options that folks can look into? Free trade agreement, obviously pieces, everybody's looking at that. But there were some specific call outs for FTZs and bonded warehouses, and how things need to be entered, and the specific date of entry into the zone. So, what else should folks be looking at that would be some things that they can do here?
So Dave, really good question. And, I've always said that, chaos brings opportunities. These types of tariffs, Yeah, they're going to come in, they're going to be implemented, but there's always ways to 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 do some things that will allow companies to save on tariffs. Some of them are some of the traditional things that we're familiar with. So when we're looking at importing, we look at three different areas: value, classification, and origin. Pretty much everything goes down to those three things. So if we look at value, is this another reason to look into the possibility of a first sale for export program? Is this another reason to potentially look at buying agency and creating a non-dutiable bona fide buying agency agreement? Especially as companies are looking to diversify their sourcing, it may be that they're going to be working with buying agents. Are there ways to make some of the value of the product no longer dutiable? When we look at classification, there's tariff engineering. When you have products that are um, made a certain way, they may have a different classification that may have a different duty rate. Now, that's sometimes a positive, sometimes a negative. Think about the steel and aluminum tariffs. When they first came out, it was just on the basic forms of steel and aluminum, and then companies started to shift the classification of their products by doing some manufacturing in another country, and then all of a sudden we saw tariffs on derivative steel products, derivative aluminum products. So, there are things that you can do, but you got to be very careful as you do them. When it comes to country of origin, when you are moving the production of a product from one country to another country, especially when you're doing it to avoid tariffs, the question always comes, what part of the production must you move? Do you have to pick up the entire factory, including all the raw material suppliers, all those component and subcomponent suppliers, and move them all into another country? Or can some of them stay in a higher duty rate country because those components, those raw materials are going to be moved into a factory in a lower duty rate country, and then they're going to be substantially transformed into a new product with a new name, use, or character? In those situations, there's a possibility. And then finally, looking at Chapter 98, there are a bunch of provisions in Chapter 98 that are seldom used, but maybe there's an opportunity if you have a product that's unconditionally duty free and you never thought about importing using one of the Chapter 98 programs. Now it might be an opportunity because that might not save you on the normal MFN duty, but it might save you on the new Section 301 duty, or maybe the new 10% duty on products from China, or some other new tariff that's going to be imposed.
Yeah, very good. And substantial transformation definitely is a key piece that you hit on, but a lot of other potential solutions there. I think very thorough. Chris or Ned, anything else to add there?
I would say that like a lot of what had been seen as the traditional ways to try to help your duty mitigation, the use of free trade agreements, the use of FTZs they have been limited by some of the recent executive orders. I mean, the threat of the duties on Colombia and Mexico and Canada, because all three of those have free trade agreements with the United States. So yeah, you can still bring those in at a regular duty rate that is zero. Then you still have these additional tariffs that you have to apply. So what used to be safe havens aren't anymore, or are heavily under threat, just like everywhere else that has traditionally been the target areas. FTZs have, you can get the duty deferral and, and delay that payment with the FTZs. But I mean, you are locking in all of those executive orders. We're having you put them in as privileged foreign status, which locks in those duties to apply no matter when that inventory comes out of that FTZ warehouse or comes out of the manufacturing zone. So yeah, I mean, you've got to watch how these executive orders and how these things are being rolled out, because it's definitely making it more and more challenging to find a way to mitigate and ensure and give you that known stability.
Right.
Yeah, I would just say, sort of repeat what I said earlier. There's no silver bullet. There's no one solution that's going to solve all of the problems. And I would say, you need to hedge. You need to have, some duplication and some alternative sources, and because it's an unpredictable environment. You might think that you're fine. You'll move all your production to Denmark, and then lo and behold, the US wants Greenland, right? So it's not easy to predict where that, what's going to be a safe haven. And what that means is that nowhere is really at this point a safe haven. And that, you need to have, to spread out the risk. And you can do that, as Tom was referring to, in terms of, I would say maybe um, country of origin would be a key thing to look at, because the problem um, you know, with the classification is that you're getting these very broad tariffs, and doesn't matter how the good is classified if you're dealing with a IEEPA 10% across the board, right? So, but yeah, I think just looking at various options to spread your risk out, at least for the time being, because there unfortunately there's no one way of dealing with what we're facing.
Yeah.
Dave, one of the questions that I'm seeing kind of touches on this, and while I can't necessarily address the question directly, the question asks whether companies are going to looking to add the reciprocal tariffs to their cost of goods sold, and that's really a business decision for each company to address. But the reason that I want to bring it up, and it's kind of like what Ned was saying, is that now we're at a period of time where there's going to be change. We know there's going to be change, and so what that means is that every company out there that imports should be talking to their business partners. They should be reviewing their agreements, right? If you have an agreement to buy something from a supplier today and you're going to make a 10% profit on it, and there's going to be a 25% tariff on it, and you decide that I can no longer afford to import that product, what does that mean? How do you get out of that contract? Do you even have a provision to get out of it in your contract? So those types of discussions companies should be having today, both with um, their suppliers, with their customers, with all of their business providers, their service providers. So maybe you have a contract for movement of goods, and you've contracted with your freight forwarder, to move 100 containers a month for the next 12 months. Well, if you're not going to be able to import, is there going to be some type of penalty there? Those are the types of things that companies today should be thinking about, because there's potential ramifications beyond just the tariff that companies need to be aware of.
Right. And
Yeah,
go ahead.
that's so important. I mean, looking at contract terms, looking at Incoterms, again, back to the earlier point of the old way of doing business might not be sufficient to address these new challenges. I wanted to address one of the questions that came out here about List 4B, and whether those tariffs that had been suspended will come back. Um, that's a possibility, just insofar as that's sort of a tool that's close at hand and something that the administration could do fairly rapidly. Um, it's a little bit yesterday's news. I mean, they're really focused on these other tools and of adding things. But I wouldn't put it past them for sure, because if they're putting 10% on all Chinese goods, why wouldn't they increase the tariffs for list 4B? One thing I want to stress is there is no guarantee that there will be an exclusion process for any of these tariffs. I've heard companies say, well, there was exclusions last time, so, we'll just wait to see, like, how can I apply for an exclusion? There are a number of exclusions, 301 exclusions, that are still in effect until the end of May. And then there's the 301 machinery exclusion, which I don't know if there'll ever be any exclusions on 301 machinery tariffs. Even the people that submitted requests that posted October 21st, they still haven't gotten past stage 2. So I have no idea where that process is going, although I'm still talking with people about that. It's it's still there's still an option, so you might as well, take advantage of it. But my point is that, and this is a little bit of a plug for us lobbyist types, but they're not, there won't be exclusions unless you ask for them. The administration is not, out of its munificence, going to decide to create an exclusion process. I think, and I've been saying this publicly, I think we might get to that point because if tariffs are imposed and there is pressure on Congress, on the administration, through constituent businesses, through constituents themselves, through the stock market, through any number of conduits, people might be looking for solutions, and exclusions is one potential solution, but it's not going to happen by itself. And so
Right.
I would encourage people to start talking about that.
And yeah, so we are very quickly, we have come up to our time. So there are a couple of additional questions. So we're just going to close out. But before we do, note that there will be a short survey that will send out by AAI to all attendees, and we encourage everybody to respond. This program was recorded and will be available for viewing in a few days. If you're an AAI member, you'll be able to access this and all past programming in the Member Center. As was mentioned earlier, the webinar has been approved for 1 credit. The verification code will be shared via email shortly after the event. AAI is also hosting part 2 of the series next week on February 19th. That's going to focus on leveraging compliance, so taking that into a deeper dive for tariffs that have been discussed today. Tom Gould is going to moderate that discussion, and he will be joined by Heidi Woods of Medtronic and Cindy De Leon of De Leon Trade LLC. AAI will also be hosting a Trade Matters fly-in on March 26th in Washington, D.C. that you can join in person or virtually to further collaborate on the trade policy. So please visit AAI's website to learn more as the seats for that event are filling up. So thanks to Gaia Dynamics for making programming possible today, for your sponsorship, and for the trade community at large. Thank you, gentlemen, for your time today and for our discussion, and for all of you for joining us. And we look forward to seeing you all again on the 19th. And so we just wish you all well, and we will talk to you soon.
Thank you.